My name is Josh, and I get to serve as pastor here. And if you're worshiping with us for the first time today, welcome. So glad you're here. Somebody invited you. I hope they can kind of give you some more connection with the context of our church if you don't have one. If you're just visiting because you're on spring break, cool. Welcome. Glad you're here. If you don't have a home church, we would really like to help you find one. We believe in the power of community in the context of the body of Christ, and whether it's this church or another church in the community, we want to help you find a place to be able to worship Jesus in the context of other relationships, people that know him and love him too. So I'd like to help you find that. So I want to share with you a story about my life, but I'm going to ask you to withhold your judgment, okay? At least until the end of the story, okay? Let me get all the way through before your face changes and you start going, oh, what kind of pastor do we have, right? So it's always a bit risky as a pastor to share stories about your own life, especially ones that don't exactly paint you in the best of pictures. So I'm asking for you to withhold judgment, at least till the story's over. So here's what I want to tell you. And this is my leading line, then I'll explain what I mean. I have never been good at waiting. How many of you knew that about me already? Oh, wow. That was way too easy. You guys poof. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. I should try confession more often on Sundays. See what else you know about me that I don't think you know. Well, that was harsh. I asked you to withhold judgment. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know that about you. All right, here's the deal. From really, really early on in life, I started kind of pushing the timeline. I was home this past weekend. Actually, my mom was here visiting for Easter, and they were talking about my childhood. You know how that is when mom's around, right? And apparently, I said my first word at 5.5 months old. That's pretty early, yep. So I was talking at 6 months, I was walking at 11 months, I was riding a bicycle with no training wheels at 4 years old, I was riding a dirt bike at 5, my first girlfriend at 7, my first real job... I'm done, I'm leaving, I'm out. Sheesh. I know what my next series on, the book of Judges. Okay. Wow. Yes, so first sort of girlfriend at 7. First real job when I was 11. I was cleaning pig pens, just so you know. My mom sent me to Australia without my parents for 64 days when I was 14 years old. I bought my first car at 15, and then 15 and a half, and then 16 and 16 and a half. I had a lot of cars. For various reasons. My first street bike at 17 years old, I bought a 750cc 4-cylinder motorcycle that went stupid fast because I'm not good at waiting. I don't know what it was, but that just gets me to age 18. And I was just horrible at waiting. Horrible at waiting. Like, Dad, when can I start driving? Son, you're 8. I don't care, Dad, right? I can do it. My mom used to say that was my favorite phrase. I can do it. I can do it. So let me get a little more honest. The times that I grew most impatient as an adult, I think, I should ask my family this, or maybe not. The times I remember growing most impatient is in the middle of what we call, you don't know what this is out here, this isn't judgment, although you already judged me, traffic. You guys know what traffic is? I'm not talking about the horse and buggy on the back road that slows things down. I'm not talking about the extra large farm implement. I am talking about bumper to bumper, tail light to headlight traffic. And if one thing Jersey is very good at, we are excellent at traffic. We're very good. And it used to just test me. Over and over and over again, traffic would test me. And let me just give you one example. My old job, the church I would go to, if there was no traffic, I guess that's not a thing. Middle of the night, nobody's around, right? It would take me about 16, 17 minutes to get to church. Most days to get home, it would take me 40 to 45 minutes to get home. And I wasn't moving most of that time. Most of that time, I was just looking at somebody else's taillights. But I used to be so, I can't believe I'm telling you this, especially after all your judgment. I don't feel real safe right now. You know what I would do when I would find traffic? I would literally drive miles further just to avoid it so I could feel like I was getting somewhere. I'd be like, oh, that looks like a nice side street, right? I don't care if it took me the exact same amount of time. I didn't even care if it took me a little bit longer to get home, as long as I didn't have to sit still. I hated sitting still in traffic. So I would just drive through neighborhoods, like, hey, Jimmy, good to see you, right? Like, just to be able to feel like I was moving forward. Didn't matter, because I have never really been good at waiting. So, you semi-judgmental friends of mine, let me ask you, are you good at waiting? How's that going for you, okay? How many would say that you are really good at waiting? You're like excellent at it. Wow, there's 2 in the room. I love it. Okay, look around. No, it's okay. It's a judgment-free zone right now. Most of us, right? The reality is most of us are horrible at waiting. Perhaps your trigger isn't traffic. Maybe you've never even sat in traffic. It might be, that was judgmental, sorry. It might be just kind of waiting for something even good to happen, right? It might be waiting for your birthday to come up, or vacation to come, or the Christmas presents. My mom had to find a different place to hide them every year, because every year I'd find them. It might be waiting for your tax refund, or your doctor's office, or the checkout line at the grocery store. Ooh, that's a moment of sanctification for me, just staying in the grocery store. But I would argue that for most of us, if it's not traffic, if it's not at the grocery store or the doctor's office, I would say that the place that we find most difficult to wait is in suffering, in pain, in confusion and disorientation. I'll say it this way. Often the hardest part of suffering is just to trust God and wait. To just wait in the mess, to wait in the confusion, to wait in the pain. None of us want to do that. It's not a naturally born skill, right? It's not something that just we wake up one day and like, I think today's a good day to suffer. I'm going to submit to suffering today. I'm just going to wait. Honestly, we want to see progress. We want to see change. We want to see growth. We want to see some signs of hope, something in the midst of our suffering so that we can think, okay, yeah, I'm getting somewhere. I might be going through the back roads, but I'm getting somewhere. You see, we're longing for this something to show us that our suffering is producing something. That our suffering has a purpose, that our suffering has a meaning, that there's a reason for it. And when that something doesn't come fast enough, what do we usually do? I'll let you answer that for yourself in your own heart. But what do you do when God's answer to your suffering doesn't come? When God's answer to your pain doesn't come? When God's answer to your disorientation or the brokenness of the relationship, what do you do in your suffering? Most of the time, I think we probably try to take matters into our own hands, don't we? We kind of white knuckle the steering wheel. I'm going to run over this Kia. Sorry, Kia drivers. Man, this is a judgmental day. But what do you do? What do you do in the midst of your suffering? We try to force God's hand. We try to force the problem. We try to make our lives move forward. We spend more time finding different doctors or different answers, or we want to do something so that we can think that our suffering has meaning and purpose, and now we're just stuck waiting. Because one of the hardest parts of suffering is to just trust God and wait. Now enter into, for just a minute, hold this space and remember where we're at in the story, right? Remember that we're about halfway through the story of the book of Ruth. This foreign woman who's now a widow, has no children, right? And if you remember from last week, Ruth just met her potential redeemer, right? She just met this, maybe answer. How's that? How do you do when you get a maybe answer in the midst of your suffering? Are you likely to just kind of wait and hope? But this is where Ruth is. We left her. She meets this, what's called a kinsman redeemer. If you were here last week, you remember that? It's a family redeemer, someone who established by God, according to the Old Testament, the person who would be taking care of the family when hard times follow them. But notice that she had met her redeemer, but her redemption had not yet come. Did you pick up on that yet? She had met a potential redeemer, but her redemption had not yet come. Think about this. At the end of last week, right? At the end of our Easter story, after the end of the reminder that all of us need a redeemer, in this story, Ruth chapter 3, Ruth goes back home with just enough food to live on, right? It maybe would have lasted her a week. Ruth went back home to no husband and no children. Ruth went back home to no blood family of her own other than her mother-in-law, and let me know how that works out. You see, Ruth went home with so much uncertainty still in her story, even though she'd met a redeemer. And let's remind ourselves what Ruth was waiting for, right? Ruth wasn't just waiting for a call back from the doctors. Ruth just wasn't waiting for the traffic to move so you could get home. Ruth wasn't just waiting for the relationship to get resolved again so that we can kind of go back to normal. Ruth was waiting for the redemption of her life. Ruth was waiting in suffering and pain and confusion, right? Her story was a mess. And the thing that we learned the first week, and that I have to remind us again and again and again, when it comes to suffering, right? Suffering is inevitable, right? Either has happened, is happening, or will happen. And we see this in Ruth's story, right? She's in the midst of this suffering. But what we also see is that suffering is never outside the control of God. Our sovereign God is never surprised by our suffering. And so here's Ruth. She's met a redeemer. She's got maybe some hope, but redemption hasn't happened yet. Remember the 4-act play, right, that we talked about that first week? So first couple of weeks was the crisis, then we've got the ray of hope. Today we're going to come up against the complication. And really, in the complication, in the midst of our suffering, right, in Ruth's complication, the issue, really, it was just delaying redemption. The complication is going to put a delay on the healing and the redemption and the hope that she's longing for, and really calls into question, are we willing to wait for God's story? Are we willing to wait for our Redeemer to act? If you have your Bibles, you can follow along in Ruth chapter 3. It'll be up on the screen as well. I want to just read through this beautiful story. Reminder, it's a true story, right? We can actually go back to genealogical records and find Ruth and Boaz, right? They truly exist. This is a real story, and it makes it all that much more powerful. Ruth chapter 3, starting at verse 1. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, okay, so remember, end of chapter 2, Naomi had met Boaz, her potential redeemer. He gave her about a week's worth of food and sent her home, right? And they invited her to come back to finish the barley season. That was maybe 2 weeks long at most, right? So it seems like she went the rest of the barley season. She stayed in Boaz's main fields, right? And she was able to have some food. But then the story just kind of goes on like nothing happened almost, right? One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." Verse 2, "Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor." You ever wonder how Naomi knew where Boaz was going to be that night? She's like a little bit of a meddling mama, you know what I'm saying? God was kind of working out this story here, right, in a way that Ruth didn't even know, and God was using Naomi to do it. Naomi finds out that Boaz was going to be at the threshing room floor, and so then she comes up with this proposal, right? Basically, notice that Naomi is trying to get Ruth a husband. Now, for those of you who have daughters, ask yourself this question as I read. Would you do it this way? Okay. Verse 3, Naomi says, "Wash, put on perfume, get dressed in your best clothes, then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you are there until he is finished eating and drinking." So she says, "Hey, you know what? Clean yourself up. Don't wear your grief clothes anymore. Take off your grief garments and put on your garments of joy. And then go to the threshing room floor in the middle of the night where a bunch of guys are hanging out." Okay, I have a daughter. Not doing that. Number 4, when he lies down, note the place where he's lying. Okay, just so we understand, what she's saying, like, there will be multiple guys there. Make sure you pick the right one. Do you understand? Like, this is how awkward this moment is right now. And can you imagine Ruth the Moabite going, "What do you want me to do? Where do you want me to go? When do you want me to go there?" Naomi says, when he lies down, note the place where he's lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. I'm sorry, it's a goofy one. Like, hey, nice toes. We'll get to that in a minute, okay? Verse 5, "I will do whatever you say." Look at how much trust Ruth has in this moment. I wonder if she said it this way, "Oh, yeah, I'll do whatever you say." Or did she say it this way, "Okay, I'll do what you say." Take a guess which one she said it with. Ruth says, "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. Verse 6, when Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and she lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. Verse 9, "Who are you?" That'd be my first question. I'm sorry. Like, that's the most honest moment right there in this whole story. It's like, huh? Like, who are you? And why are you at my feet? Notice Ruth's response. What did she say in verse 2 when she described herself? She's not even a servant. Chapter 2, right? She said. Here she says, "It's me, it's Ruth. I'm your servant," right? Her identity is beginning to change. "I'm your servant, Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." Verse 10, "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. Good thing he figured out who she was. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, do not be afraid, for I will do for you all that you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character." Verse 12, "Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family," this is Boaz still speaking directly to Ruth on the threshing room floor in the middle of the night. And he's saying, although it is true that I am a kinsman, a guardian redeemer of our family, there's another one who's more closely related than I. Verse 13, "Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he's not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Now lie here until morning." Verse 14, "So she lay at his feet until morning, got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, 'No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor.'" He also said, "Bring me the shawl that you are wearing and hold it out." And when she did, he poured into 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on top of her. And then he went back to town. Verse 16, when Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go?" Hey, how'd it go? After that kind of plan, I'd be asking the same question. And then Ruth told her everything that Boaz had done for her. Verse 17, and added, "He gave me the 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Last verse. Then Naomi said, let's read this word together. Wait. We're going to do it again. 1, 2, 3. Wait. Oof. So hard in suffering. Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until this matter is settled today. Wait. Okay, so as a dad, I'll just say it. This seems like a crazy way to get a husband. Okay. And it kind of is, but you need to know a little bit about the history, right? You got to know a little bit about Hebrew culture in that day. Naomi understood that Boaz was notice that she used the word a kinsman redeemer, not the kinsman redeemer. And there was a process. If there was someone, and Boaz knew this, if there was someone that was closer to Ruth and Naomi in terms of their genealogical line, their family line, if there was somebody closer, that person had the first right and first responsibility. And so if Ruth wanted the kinsman redeemer, the one that was closest to her, to marry her, she could actually just go with Naomi and present that to him in public and just say, "Hey, you're my kinsman redeemer. Our lives are falling apart. I need you." Right? She could do that publicly. But because Naomi, it appears, had either extended a significant amount of trust or perhaps fallen in love with Boaz, he was a kinsman redeemer. So she couldn't just walk up to him in the middle of the street and say, "Hey, Boaz, let's get married," right? I need some grain. So it was not customary for that widow to go to someone who wasn't their closest relative. Naomi knows this. She also knows that when someone asks for the covering or the edge of the garment to fall upon them, right? What was really happening in Hebrew culture in that day, when someone, you can see it in Ezekiel, you can see it in Isaiah, there's a couple different passages, you can go and check this out. But when someone asks for you to cover me with their garment, what they're saying is, would you extend your family over me? Would you extend your person over me? Because a person's garment, right, what they wore on the outside demonstrated to the world who they were. And certain colors and certain styles and all those kinds of things, it would demonstrate this is who I am, right? And so in order for someone to take a portion of their garment and to cover you with it, it's saying, I want to be who you are. I want to be with you. I want to identify with you. It was the customary way of saying, would you cover me with your family? Would you cover me with who you are? And so, think about this. Boaz knows it. Naomi knows it. She could have picked a different redeemer. She could have picked a younger, a richer, a better looking, but she didn't, right? Ruth chose Boaz to be her kinsman redeemer. And that choice, right, she wasn't guaranteed that Boaz was going to say yes. If she had gone to the relative that was closest to her, she would have had a guarantee. He was required by law, right? And if he didn't, then he had to find someone else to take care of the issue, right? She took a huge risk by asking Boaz to be her kinsman redeemer. And then all she could do was all that you and I can do in the midst of our suffering. Wait. Wait. Wait to see if he would say yes. Wait to see if he would follow through. Wait to see if the covering would actually come. Wait to see if the suffering would actually end. Wait. Wait. Think about this with me for a moment. That word, wait. Think about this in the context of our faith, our relationship with God. I believe that waiting reveals our level of trust. I really do. Waiting reveals our level of trust in God's sovereignty, in God's plan, in God's purpose, right? Not only does waiting reveal our level of trust, waiting deepens our level of trust, right? For any of you who have waited for a season in your life of incredible suffering to end, for any of you who have waited through uncertainty, any of you have waited through the phone call with the results from a test, right? You know that waiting really reveals how much trust that you have in God. But it also, as you wait, it deepens that trust. It goes further into our soul. Waiting has this way of deepening our trust in God. And the last thing that waiting really does, and you can see this in Ruth, waiting demonstrates our level of trust, right? People around us can see how much trust we have in God as we wait, can't they? And this is what was happening in Ruth, right? Like, she was waiting for her Redeemer to give an answer. She was waiting for the Redeemer to choose to cover her. She was waiting for the Redeemer to take her story and make it from broken to beautiful, from ashes to glory, right? She was waiting. And all that waiting reveals the level and the depth and the character of the trust that she had. But even more so, her waiting reveals the character of Boaz, doesn't it? Okay, I like to say it this way. Trust is a decision that is reflected by how we behave in suffering. Does that make sense? Trust is a decision, right? You either choose to trust or you don't trust, right? Like, trust is a choice, always. If it's not a choice, it's not trust, right? So trust is a decision that is reflected by how we behave. You can tell whether or not somebody trusts somebody by what they do. There are certain people in my life that I would never let drive my truck. Ever. No offense to any of you Kia drivers. But there are certain people in my life I would never hand the keys to my truck to. Never. 2 weeks ago, though, we were home in New Jersey. I was spending some time with my mom and my brother, and we were hanging out. I met his girlfriend for the first time, found out she likes trucks, and I handed her my keys. She's like, "You're going to let me drive your truck?" I said, "Mm-hmm." My brother's like, "You're going to let her drive your truck?" I was like, "Mm-hmm." So, you see, trust is a decision that's reflected by how we behave. If I don't trust you, you're not getting the keys to my truck. I'm sorry. But what Ruth does, see, by her actions, she demonstrates her trust. And what if Ruth hadn't trusted Naomi, right? Really? What if Ruth hadn't trusted Naomi? What if Ruth had just said, "Oh, I'll do whatever you say," and then go do whatever she wants, right? No offense to most of us who are duplistic that way. But what if Ruth had just put those things into words? Oh, Naomi, I trust you. And then went off and trusted herself. What if Ruth had asked Boaz to be her redeemer? What if she went through the whole first half of the process, asked Boaz to be her redeemer, and then she went away and sought another redeemer someplace else, went to another guy the next day. "Hey, what are you doing today? Can I get some of your blanket?" Right? Think about that. Ruth's trust was demonstrated by her behavior. She did exactly what Naomi told her to do. And she asked her heart's desire of her Redeemer for redemption, and then she waited. And when Ruth decided to both trust and wait, she was leaning into the hardest part of suffering, allowing our Redeemer to work in the midst of our pain. Allowing our Redeemer to work in the midst of our suffering. Okay, but I want to stop here for a second. I need us to understand something. Most of my life, I've heard the story of the book of Ruth. It's one of my mom's favorite stories. I've probably heard dozens of sermons on the book of Ruth. And most of the time, those sermons, those stories, those podcasts I've listened to, they focus on the trust of Ruth. And it is magnificent, the amount of trust that she shows in this story, in the midst of her suffering. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to make it any smaller than it should be. But really, there's something else that's on display that I think is even bigger. There's something else, beyond Ruth's trust in that moment, and beyond Ruth's behavior in choosing to trust. You know what is on display in these 18 verses? The character of Boaz. The character of the Redeemer is being revealed in her waiting. Can I say that again? The character of the Redeemer is being revealed in her waiting, right? So just walk through the story with me for a moment, right? Boaz honors a vulnerable woman in a vulnerable situation, okay? So threshing floors, right? They were public spaces usually on top of the mountain away from the city, because what they would do it at night because the night breezes would come in, and so they would take all of their harvest, they would bring it to the threshing floor. There'd be a bunch of different people there, mostly landowners, and then they would take this winnowing fork, is what it's called. It's kind of like our pitchfork, and they'd take the barley and they'd lift it up and they'd shake it, and all the chaff would blow away and all the grain would fall back to the stone. And it was something that happened year after year after year, but it was far away from the city. It was a public space, and in some ways, threshing floors had kind of a questionable reputation, right? There was eating and drinking and fire and men. Okay, so this is what was happening on the threshing floor. And there was multiple landowners there. And this is where Naomi sends Ruth, the foreigner, the Moabite, the widow. And in Hebrew culture, at that time, women did not have a whole lot of rights. So for a woman to show up on the threshing floor, kind of like this half-workout, half-party scene in the middle of the night, was a risk. It really was. And notice what Boaz does. He honors this vulnerable woman. And he protects her. Think about what he protects her from. Not only does he offer to protect her from the other men, that's why he said stay here, right? For the rest of the night, stay close, stay covered. You know what else he protected her from? He protected her from his own desires. If Boaz had wanted to, right? If Boaz had wanted to, he could have taken advantage of the situation. But the character of Boaz is revealed as he honors this vulnerable woman. He protects her from his own desires. He protects her from the desires of other men. And then he goes on and he's honest about his role, right? Like, this is amazing. Here's a young, attractive woman that wants to share the rest of life with you. And in that moment, Boaz could have lost his head and be like, yep, let's do it tomorrow, right? But he's honest. Verse 12, he starts talking about his role, and he says, look, I am a kinsman redeemer, but there's one closer than you. His character is being so revealed in this moment. And then, after he tells her about this other kinsman redeemer and makes this promise to her, he continues to protect her reputation, right? He invites her to stay, and then he asks her to leave early, and he sends her home with grain. You know why? To explain the visit in case somebody sees her on the road. Hey, where were you? Oh, I was at the threshing room floor. Oh, no, but I got grain. I just got some grain, right? He's protecting her image, her reputation. And then in that same giving of barley, what he's doing, he's providing an incredible blessing to this foreign widow and her mother-in-law. You know how much barley that is that he gave her? 70 pounds. This lady was jacked, bro. She's throwing it down. Yeah, what's up? Sorry, Jersey came out. But like 70 pounds, he's given her not just a week's worth of food, but like months worth of food for her and her mother-in-law. And not only is it food, but this barley, you know what it was, really? It was a deposit. It was a symbol of a promise that he was making, not only to him, not only to her, not only to Ruth, but also to Ruth's mother-in-law. That barley was a reason for her to visit the threshing floor, protect her identity. It was a blessing for her so she didn't have to go out and work the fields the next day. And it was a promise. It was a deposit. It was saying, I'm going to follow through. And here's how I'm going to show you. And not only did he give the food to Ruth, he gives it to both Ruth and who else? Naomi. Verse 17, when Ruth recalls the conversation, right? She explains, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Boaz is not just saying, I'll marry you, but I'll take care of your whole family. I'll take on your mother-in-law. That's impressive. And then, if you look at verse 15, notice that he went back to town. Right, this is the character of Boaz. He makes the promise, he gives a deposit, he protects her from his own desires and the desires of others. He sends her back with that promise, and then he immediately goes and follows through. Don't get me wrong, the trust that Ruth extended in that moment was staggering, but the character of the Redeemer is what is the real story. The character of the Redeemer who protects the vulnerable, who honors widows, who the character of the Redeemer. Who steps up, provides covering for vulnerable, respect for the disrespected, love for the unlovable, grace for those who don't think they deserve it. This is the character of Boaz. This is the character of the kinsman redeemer. And in Boaz, we see a reflection of Jesus. In Boaz, we see a reflection of our great Redeemer. The protector of the vulnerable. The lover of the unlovable. But notice for me with a minute. Notice in verse 16, when Ruth gets home to her mother-in-law, excuse me, Ruth gets home to her mother-in-law, and Naomi asks this question, right? She asked the question, how did it go, my daughter? Okay, I need you to see something for just a minute, because this is really important as we begin to understand the character of our Redeemer. In all the translations that you would probably read, NIV, NLT, KJV, all those V's, all the different versions that you would look at, the English, the question is asked, how did it go? But when you go back to the Hebrew, when you go back to the original language, you find out that Naomi isn't asking, how did it go? She asked the very same question that Boaz asked her in the middle of the night. You know what Naomi was really asking? Who are you, my daughter? That's the Hebrew question. That's the original intent. Ruth comes back from this, incredible moment a potential redemption. And Naomi knows who she is, right? She physically understands that this is my daughter-in-law, Ruth. But what she's asking, she's saying, Ruth, are you still the Moabite? Are you still the servant? Or are you Ruth, the betrothed of our kinsman redeemer? She's really asking, who are you? Here's the truth. When we choose to trust God and wait for our Redeemer in the midst of our suffering, it's God's character that's really on display. It's God's character. How honorable is God? How trustworthy is God? How protective is God? How gracious is God? How much does God actually follow through on his promises? When we wait for our Redeemer and our suffering, what's really revealed, what's really on the line, it's God. It's his character. It's his promises that are on the line. And just like Naomi knew that was Ruth when she walked in that morning, God already knows what you and I are made of. The question is, do we know what God's made of in our suffering? Do we understand what he is made of? I love how Louis Giglio says that. He says, God does not allow you to go through testing to see what you are made of. He allows you to go through testing so that you can see what he is made of. So that you can see the character of the Redeemer in your life. That last recommendation, verse 18, when Naomi says to Ruth, and she uses that word wait, do you know what that word really is in the Hebrew? It's the same word that you would see translated as sit still or be still. It reminds me of Psalm 46:10, where the psalmist challenges us, be still and know that I am God. When we choose stillness in our suffering, the character of God is revealed in our lives and to all those around us. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth, right? It's God's name that's on the line, not ours. It's God's character. It's God's promises in the midst of our suffering. And guess what? In God, all our promises are yes and amen. If we would only be still. That word be still literally translates, take your hands off the problem. Like let it go. Open your white knuckles. This is what it means to be still. And this is what Naomi says to Ruth. Be still, my daughter. One of the hardest things to do in suffering is to trust God and wait. Hardest parts of suffering is to trust God and wait. But in the waiting, God's character is revealed through us. In the waiting, God's character is revealed through us.